In 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Moon Tea podcast. Today we have Ben.
Hey guys, thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Hey.
And I also want to point out that Hugh has really pretty plants behind him. So
I agree.
We have a plant theme going through a lot of our podcast episodes, it would seem. I'll have to find out what these are called though. Just arrived. So.
And the lighting is perfect. So
we should have put this right. Pretend there's a plant.
I think that plant is some sort of like Monterosa. Alicia and I were looking at plants today.
Oh.
So I think that's what you've got, Hugh. But
yeah,
awesome.
You can search it up. I will. I'll have to ask. I'll definitely find out.
Yeah. What's up, Ben? For some context, Ben is a friend of Alicia's. He's from Vancouver, works in medicine. Oh, one thing I thought was cool is someone asked Ben, like, what do you do? And he said, I work in medicine. But I feel like the normal doctor response is to be like, I'm an anesthesiologist, like just be like, I'm fancy, like right away. But then if you say medicine, then it's like, oh, nurse.
It could be a lot of things.
Or like public health person, or so I thought that was pretty interesting. I had the privilege of hanging out with Ben for many days this week.
Mm-hmm.
He's visiting for the week. Today is our last day, and yeah, really really cool guy. We took him to a friendsgiving, and he literally won a prize because you were the most. What was it?
It was participation marks. Let's be real. It was I think I got the best participation. So I didn't win the prize for the best response, but best participation.
Was it a competition for something?
It was just like everyone goes around and talks about themselves, and then the host was like, oh, for an incentive we have a prize. And then we like voted for it, and Ben won one of the prizes. Like, dude.
There we go, Ben.
It's
an honor to have you on the podcast, man.
My biggest accomplishment right there, participation prize from friendsgiving. I think I won like a bag of coffee and some popcorn. Wow. So it was huge accomplishment.
Successful night. Yeah, absolutely.
I gave it back to the host though, but it was a big win. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Ben, do you wanna like talk about yourself? And
sure. Yeah, I think you kind of gave a good intro. My name is Ben. I'm from Canada. So I'm very thankful that the Americans are very welcoming and had me for most of this week. So Canadian, grew up there in Vancouver specifically. Currently a resident in anesthesia. I just started earlier this year. I think the reason why I say medicine is like because I'm a relatively junior trainee too, so I find that I don't want to say like I'm a doctor or things like that, because that's I don't think I'm there yet. So I think that's probably why I say medicine. So yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, it's like residency, you're technically a doctor, but you're just not fully trained to be on your own as a doctor, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, so you technically do have that kind of MD at the end of the name, but your responsibility is still kind of a graduated process throughout the years. So yeah, sometimes like you definitely get more responsibility as you go through, but at the end of the day, technically you're still supervised at all times, and any sort of decision that you make hypothetically has to be, for the most part, like reviewed with someone more senior.
Wow. And residency is usually what, 4 to 8 years, 6 years?
Yeah, so it's variable, and I think in the States it's also different, but in Canada, depending on the specialty that you do, is anywhere from 2 to 6 years for residency alone. So it's extremely variable depending on how much suffering you want to sign up for.
Classic.
I've not heard of 2-year residencies in the US.
Yeah, I think I think that the quickest one for you guys is 3 years, is what I've been told. But in Canada, family medicine is 2 years. But I don't think you guys even do family medicine. I think you guys call them primary care providers or something like that. But the system is a bit different. But the shortest one in Canada is 2 years. So it's pretty nice.
Wow, awesome. I'm so curious. Like, if you have any questions you want to go for first, John, but I definitely want to hear the background of how you even got into medicine.
Oh, I've been getting to know Ben all week.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah, I think he's a bit bored of my stories by now, so I think you might have to
tell me. No,
Yeah.
it's okay to repeat some stories too. It's totally allowed.
I think I'm running out of all the good ones at this point.
Oh
So.
no, dude.
Ooh, any favorites?
No, I'm kidding. I think we've gotten to know each other pretty well though, I'd say, over the past few days. So it's been great.
Yeah. Little bit of a tangent, but how has your week of playing in New York City? Like, how's that been?
Yeah, it's been great. Huge city. I imagine, Hugh, you've probably been here before, right? I don't actually know where you're from, but I imagine you've been to New York City. Is that right?
I've been there a time or two.
Yeah. So yeah, huge city. So it's been great. In some ways it's a lot more diverse than Vancouver. I think that's one thing that we talked about quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
Vancouver, like Canada, is supposed to be super diverse, but for some reason Vancouver has we do have a bit of diversity, but it tends to favor select groups. So it's been really cool to see so much more diversity here, and it's just such a busy city. Like, you guys have restaurants open all throughout the night, whereas a lot of Vancouver restaurants open close by like 10 or 9 p.m. So like the culture is just so different, I find. And I've really enjoyed kind of getting to explore the city and like seeing what people are like here. And yeah, it's been great.
That's amazing. That's really cool. Yeah, I'm from Arizona, so slightly
okay.
different. We have a similar type of lifestyle, like 9, 10 p.m.
Yeah.
Things close. The bars or whatnot close at 2 a.m.
Oh, okay.
So,
Okay.
Yeah.
So it was definitely a bit of a shock to me when I first arrived, but no, it's really good. I feel like New York City, you can be whoever you want to be, and I think that's why a lot of people like it here.
I think that might be the right statement. Yeah, I feel like, I don't know. Have you found any? You guess for 1 week, I don't know how much, but culturally, just meeting people. I know there's some biases or stereotypes I'm not even going to bring up right now, unless you know.
Yeah.
But what do you think?
I don't know. I most of the people I've met have been through friends, right? So everybody has been so friendly. Like, I went to this friendsgiving thing and none of them knew me, but they were so welcoming and more than willing to have me. So that's definitely not the typical New York person that I was expecting. But
also a bunch of the people there had moved to the city,
right,
in the last 6 months.
Right. So they were all like very open to building.
They're not brainwashed yet.
Yeah,
is what I'm hearing. Yeah.
They're not jaded yet. They still have a little bit of heart in them. But there's a little bit of a difference, I guess, like meeting people on the streets and stuff. I asked for directions when I first got to the airport, and definitely they're not as friendly as they would be in Canada, but I think we're also a little bit too friendly probably at times. So yeah, the bar is definitely really high, I think.
I think friendly is a good default. I don't know if too friendly is if that is ever problematic.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah,
but I guess like in a big city with tons of people, you just don't have the time or energy to like extend that friendliness to everybody, because there's just too many people around. You got to really prioritize that energy for people you care about, your closer group of friends and family, I imagine. So that's probably it.
Yeah. Did you grow up in Vancouver?
Yeah, so I was born in Asia. I was born in Taiwan, and then I grew up in a suburb of Vancouver. It's called Surrey. It's kind of like a little bit more ghetto is what you guys would describe it as. It's a bit better now. It's really grown, but growing up, it was kind of like, I remember when I first went to university, I would tell people I'm from Surrey, and then you'd get this like weird look because they never interacted with anybody from Surrey before. And it's like, we used to have a lot of shootings and stabbings and things like that. So we definitely didn't have a good rep, but Yeah, so but it was right outside of Vancouver, so it was still really close to a big city.
Wow. I'm curious, is that what got you into medicine in a way, having seen such a, or is that just news that you didn't really see firsthand? And
yeah, it's interesting because most of the violence that happens in Surrey is targeted for the most part. And so I was like a pretty nerdy kid. So I was really shielded from that. It's like I was always in the library and I didn't really interact a lot with people that were involved in these activities. Um, but yeah, like I think in some ways it's kind of, it was like certainly formative to grow up in an environment like that. But I always think back about it, and like I think in some ways it's like I think maybe it's if anything, it's probably taught me a lot of there's definitely a lot of good things, because I think growing up in Surrey, there weren't a huge kind of like Asian population, at least, or at least like East Asian population. So growing up in Surrey, it was like, oh, you like really need to make an effort to get to know people and fit in. But I think the other side of this is, because of the amount of violence, you always felt like growing up that you're not supposed to stand up for yourself. You should, because there's always this risk that there could be something more violent if you were to be like, hey, you can't treat me like this. And so there's a culture of just like not doing anything about like bullying and things like that, and just kind of being a lot more passive, when I think back on it. So yeah, like, but yeah, I don't know if it's super related to medicine, but definitely a bit related to who I turned out to be and kind of my personality today, I think.
Was Surrey pretty racially diverse, would you say?
Yeah, so it was diverse in the sense that it wasn't necessarily predominantly white. So there were a lot of people from like India, Pakistan, I would say probably like 30 to 40%. And then maybe another 40% were Caucasian. And then you have maybe 10% ish or so that were other races, like African, Canadian, Asian, things like that. So in some ways it was pretty diverse. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
awesome.
Yeah.
And
then and then I moved to Vancouver when I started university, and I haven't gone back since. So
yeah.
Cool. You were thinking about moving to Toronto at one point, and then
I thought about it because I guess just for background, like a big issue with Vancouver is there's definitely like a diversity issue, especially when you're like I don't know if you're familiar with the term, but there's Vancouver City itself, and there's kind of a broader Vancouver. It's like when you say New York, there's New York City, but then there's also this like broader suburbs that are kind of encompassed within this term. But in Vancouver, if you actually go straight into just Vancouver City proper, like you find a big Caucasian population, you find a big Asian population, but that's really it. And so in some ways we really lack the diversity that like Toronto has, for example. So for a while I thought about moving to Toronto just to be able to experience that. And it's also busier, people are more intense and more ambitious, and I thought that would just be a good environment to kind of start my career in. Whereas like Vancouver-ites are known to be like laid back, we like don't really work that much, we walk our dogs all the time, and so I thought it'd be good to kind of spend some of my formative years in Toronto. So
that's kind of how I approached New York City.
Yeah,
it's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
In medicine, would you, if you wanted to move to Toronto, would you be able to?
Yeah, there's a few ways to do it. So so like for example, when you apply to medical school, you can choose to, if you get multiple offers, you can choose to do school there, similar to what you would do here. And then we have our matching system for residency, which is quite similar to what you guys have in the States. And you can rank what you want, but the algorithm kind of pops out a city that you're not assigned to. They favor kind of your rank and as well as the program's ranks, and it just pops out one answer for you. So if you just happen to not be what they're looking for, then you don't have that much say. So those are kind of the main ways that people move around. But I find for the most part, though, it's a bit random. So you don't really have that much control over which school accepts you for medical school, which school wants you for residency. Yeah, so.
Makes a lot of sense. It's similar to the system here, I'm pretty sure. One of my best friends in college was a doctor, I guess. Now a residency right now. And he was dating another lady who is a throat specialist, I believe, as well. And they were trying to apply to similar residencies, and there's a whole game to it, and they had to do this. Just that is difficult.
Yeah, it's in Canada we call it couples matching, and I've seen it ruin a lot of relationships. So it's not easy. It's like because you have to balance a few things. Like obviously you want to with couples matching, you don't really, there's no big disadvantage in the sense that you still apply to all the schools and you can put in any sort of permutation that you can think of in terms of where you guys match respective to one another. But the challenge is that if you don't get the spot you want to get, you're left with this thought like, am I not good enough, or is it because my partner held me back? And so a lot of people for that reason don't want to do it, and then they end up being separated from their partner and things like that. So it's a tough process. And like I think part of a lot of the things that people are expected to give up when they want to go into medicine and go through medical training. So yeah, but I think it's true for a lot of other fields. Like if you have a really good job across the, in New York or on the West Coast or whatever, like you obviously would want to move and go, and you have to coincide that with your partner's wishes and who you're seeing at the time. So
yeah. And I'm guessing you are maybe dating somebody, or are you?
Yeah. My partner and I have been.
Of course. he was like,
I don't see it. I don't see it.
He was like, probably taken.
My partner and I have been dating for a long time. So when we were going through the matching process, it was challenging for us because my partner, he's not in medicine, so we can't do the couples matching thing. And so there was a lot of back and forth about where we want to go and like our priorities and things like that. Thankfully, my partner was like super understanding, and he was always from the perspective of like, oh, we'll just go wherever you want to go. Your career is more important and things like that. So for me, there wasn't a lot of pressure, and I could just pick where I wanted to go. So I was pretty lucky from that perspective for sure.
He seems like a gentleman.
Yeah, I would say so. Or at least on the air, I would.
Oh my.
We'll talk more offline.
Yeah. Once we stop recording, I'll tell you the real details, Hugh.
Oh, drama. Hey, no, I mean, we had Julie Yang on episode before, and they were dating just this past Friday. They got engaged. So, hey.
Oh.
Yeah, we had Julie, and then maybe like 2 episodes before that we had Thomas.
Yeah.
And then I found out they were engaged a few weeks ago.
Wow, that's exciting.
I've never actually met them in person, but I've talked to them for an hour each, and they're both lovely people. And I was like, woohoo!
Did they talk about their engagement at all during these podcasts? I guess their plan for it or anything like that?
So on the way here, I just listened to it because my dad and mom love Thomas and Julie, and they hadn't listened to the podcast, and I was like, oh, we can throw it on. Sure. This is slightly like egotistical, but I guess I'll do this. And there is a moment where John's like, oh, are you guys married? And then she's like, oh no, haha, we've been dating for 4 years. And it was like an interesting moment. And she's like, I'm like pretty interested. And I'm like, I called her, I was like, oh, pretty interested. And she's like, yeah, I'm just like pretty interested. I mean, I might just like marry the guy and maybe talk about his babies. I was like, oh my goodness. It was so funny.
And so he watched that episode when it aired and then proposed the next day, right?
No.
He's like, oh, she's ready.
Yeah, she's ready. She's ready. Yeah. You guys were the reason they got engaged.
I'll take it. Yes, definitely. Absolutely. The Go Moon Tea podcast. Here we go.
So your parents listen to your podcast, hey?
Here and there. Yeah, Dad was on it
Yeah.
too. Yeah, it's been
Okay.
fun. Very, very, very few times though. They're like,
Yeah.
we'll get in. I'm trying to get them to learn about Apple Podcast or Spotify. They don't know how to use tech yet, so
No,
they haven't been
no.
able to, take a look.
Have they just been like kind of watching it on YouTube then? The kind of the
I'll
simplest way
throw it
to
on
like,
here and there with
yeah,
Dad. Will take a look here and there, or on
yeah,
the TV. I'll show a Zoom recording if we just record it, and then be like,
yeah,
here,
yeah.
you can get a sneak preview.
Ah, that's sweet. Early release for early screening for the VIPs, right? So
True, actually. But yeah, but back to you, really, Ben,
oh yeah,
since
sorry.
you're the star of the show today. And honestly, I'd love to hear more. I'm happy to, we're happy to talk about anything, but I'm just really genuinely so curious about
Mm.
origin stories of how people get into certain career paths. And I
Yeah,
think medicine is one of the most, I think medicine as a career path, especially becoming a doctor, is one of the most, you just have to dedicate so early on for so
right,
many years. You have to do pre-med and undergrad, go
right.
to MA or get your MD, I mean, and goodness, and then
Yeah,
residency, and then even specializing from there.
right.
How did that process go for you? How did you end up in this spot you were in? And what did
Yeah.
you think about any struggles?
Yeah, wow, like there were
Probably
tons of
none. You're
struggles.
like, never.
No, 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 no.
It was
We can
easy. I
talk
woke
for
up.
yeah, I would take up the next 50 episodes of this podcast if we wanted to talk about the struggles, but
Fun.
um yeah, so like I think back on this a lot, and I think um I think the classic story you always hear about people that go into medicine is like they were inspired at some young age by like whether their experience in medicine or like a family or a friend's experience in medicine or something like that, or um, and they always say things along the lines of like, oh, I've known for ever since I was 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 or some like an insanely young age where there's really no real understanding of what medicine truly is. But I don't think I ever had anything like that, to be honest. I think even up until, to be honest with you, even up until my last year of high school, I don't know what you guys call that here, but the last year of high school before you go into university, I didn't think about medicine. To be honest, I wanted to do science because that was what I was good at, but I didn't think about medicine, and it wasn't until I started my university when I was like, oh, like this could actually be something meaningful and worthwhile. Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah, so like I don't think there was like a big moment that led to me wanting to pursue medicine. I think it was a gradual process of thinking about what I valued in life and being very practical and honest with the things that I enjoyed doing and things I didn't enjoy doing. So I think one of the big things I consider was like something research related and science. And one of the earliest things I did was like do a bit of research, and I absolutely hated it, at least the initial research experiences I had. And that kind of forced me to go back to the drawing board and look at what else I could do. And to be honest, like even when I got into medical school, I didn't have a good understanding of what medicine was, because I didn't have, no one in my family like had a background in medicine, like no nurses, no doctors, nothing like that. So to be honest with you, even on the first day of med school, I didn't really understand what medicine truly was. I didn't know like what like doctors specialize. I didn't know what different specialties were and like what patient care actually looked like. So I think it was a lot of just process of elimination, and I think fundamentally just thinking that I liked challenging careers, and I wanted to do something that allowed me to be challenged every day. And I fundamentally liked learning, and I fundamentally enjoyed working with people. And I think those are kind of the main things that drove me into medicine, I think. But it wasn't like a big kind of inspirational, like life-changing events, like, no one died around me or anything like that led me to go into medicine. And so probably not the most exciting story, but
You
honestly,
just really liked OChem.
yeah, yeah. Yeah. So it was just yeah, it's just little things that kind of slowly just inched me towards doing medicine, I think.
Awesome. I love
Yeah.
it. And then how did you end up into anesthesia?
Yeah. So that I thought about a little bit more. So there's also a difference between kind of the Canadian system and the US system. So some of my considerations might be a bit more specific to Canada, but I tried kind of everything. And I think the beauty about the Canadian system, which I don't really know much about the American system, but we have the opportunity to try a lot of different things and really get experience to kind of the whole variety of what medicine could look like. And so, I took advantage of that. Like I started exploring different medical specialties since first year and all throughout my entire experience. I think every medical specialty possible, I probably spent a week or two thinking about. And so, I think it went down to just deciding what I enjoyed the most from medicine. And I think, I think that the main thing that I thought about, actually, interestingly, is I didn't enjoy seeing a lot of patients in pain. And a lot of specialties in medicine, you have to inflict the pain on your patients in order to get them better. So, for example, a lot of surgical specialties or procedural specialties where you use your hands a lot, there's a lot of hurting them in the process in order to treat them. So whether that's like a skin cut or, like a minor procedure like stitching someone's skin and things like that, like you have to be very, or like sticking a telescope up, like, all the orifices of the human body and things like that. Like a lot of it, like you have to be okay with inflicting a certain amount of pain on patients. And I that was the one thing that I just could not tolerate. I hated it. I hated like, the initial time when you stick the needle in to like freeze the skin, or I hated it when we would put like, we would take a little, like a scalpel and cut through the skin of an abscess to drain it out and things like that. And it's not that I loved treating the pain, but I hate causing the pain and inflicting the pain. And so I think that was a big thing for me as well when I was choosing my specialties. That ruled out a few things. I think that was a big part of it. And then the other part of it is just imagining what I would be happy doing in like 10, 20, 30 years and what I enjoy the most about medicine. And I think you have to decide in medicine whether or not you want to do something that's, like acute, in the sense that if you make a wrong decision, your patients could do really poorly, or if you want to do things that allow you a little bit more time to react and maybe is not super crucial. So like, things with the skin, things that are more cosmetically driven, things that don't necessarily cause you to kind of die on the spot right away. And I kind of realized that I was more interested in doing things that could make a lot of impact in terms of like life and death and like really challenging situations. So I think that's what ultimately drove me into anesthesia. And I can talk about it for ages, because there's just so many exciting things in anesthesia. But I think those are kind of the main things that drove me into it.
I have a question. The doctors that look at X-rays.
Mm-hmm.
What are they called?
So like radiologists.
Radiologists.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I knew someone who became a doctor and he wanted to do that. Mm-hmm. And I think for the right reasons, because he did not want to talk to patients.
Right.
And from what I've seen, that is a particularly dangerous career path to go through, because there are like software systems that can like see the X-rays and then just like see something with way more precision.
Yeah.
And so that's an example of like technology kind of changing that. Like, is there anything from the technology world that like helps you, that's like a recent development that helps with anesthesiology?
Yeah.
And then is there any risk of anesthesiology robots taking your jobs?
I think that's really the $1 million question for a lot of specialties, and anesthesia is a big one. For a lot of different reasons. So again, there's a difference in the way the systems are done, but in the States, a big proportion of anesthetics are given by nurses that are really well trained. And so there's that was really the start of kind of deciding which parts of the job doesn't necessarily need all the years of training. And I think that ties in with technology as well, because you can really identify specific tasks that aren't necessarily, that if it's very precision driven, could be done by machine. If it doesn't necessarily require experience and training, could also be taken over. So I think that was a big part of it. And anesthesia in general, like from my limited experience, has just been getting safer and safer. And to this day is like it's anesthetics in general like are extremely safe. And so there's a lot that technology has been able to do for us. And I think in the States specifically, there's been like inventions of specific monitoring devices, specific things that allow us to detect an event or predict some sort of bad event. So I think there's been definitely there's always a consideration that technology could replace a few things, like parts of our careers and stuff and our jobs. Yeah, I mean, I think radiologists used to worry a lot about that because, hypothetically, like a computer can go through and like pick out all the things. But I think in honesty, that's probably something that won't be in practice until probably for another 20, 30 years, probably not even in our lifetime. I think we'll definitely use it to help us along, but I don't think we as people are willing to accept that a machine has decided our healthcare and not a person that has done so many years of training. Whether or not that's actually because the machine is worse, which isn't necessarily the case, but I think a big part of medicine is making the patients feel like they're taken care of and making the patients feel like they've been cared for properly and like dealing with their anxieties and their thoughts and their goals. And that part of that, I don't think the machines are able to do. So yeah, I don't imagine my job, like losing my job to a machine anytime soon. That's, but definitely, like I think it really help us out. It can save us a lot of time. It can definitely be great for patients, and things like that.
I think that's fair because even people who like work on AI and like make AI have specifically said this should be used to inform decisions and not to make decisions. Like I'm reading a book by the guy who used to be the Google CEO for like 10 years, but he was like, I want to be very clear about this. It's like we should not be like relying on AI for decisions, but just like use it as a tool.
Right. And I think the part that at least I find interesting is at the end of the day, there needs to be a sense of accountability. And I think that's the part that AI never wants to take on. Because any sort of like machine assisted prediction in healthcare that I've seen always has this little disclaimer at the very bottom, like this does not, like take over the decision or like care of a physician, yada, yada, yada. And I think at the end of the day is that they don't want to accept the responsibilities if they make the wrong prediction or the wrong judgment. And I think that's the main difference, is that as humans and doctors, you have to be accountable for these actions, and that informs the way you care for patients and things like that. But machines don't necessarily have that sense of responsibility and accountability, and whether or not that matters or not, I think that's debatable. But I think ultimately they're never going to be able to take over the decision-making process, because the machines and the companies certainly won't want to take responsibility for anything that is done incorrectly, right? So
yeah, I love that. Excuse me. That makes a lot of sense, in the sense of being a really skilled and nuanced, and being in a really skilled and nuanced profession, having the oversight of the final decision, but also using any tools as an extension to improve your quality of care. I think that's really awesome. I'm curious, the thought that came up as you said, don't rely on any AI, etc. This is going to go to John because he's a Tesla fanboy. Is autonomous. I've thought about this quite a bit because I worked with someone.
I assume Ben is not a Tesla fanboy, by the way.
I'm not as much of a fanboy, but I'm definitely moving up on the
Yeah.
ladder. Yeah.
All right, gentlemen. So back to you, Ben. So with regards to AI not driving decisions, but you're literally letting AI at level 4, level 5 drive you. And then there comes a point where, from a developer's point of view, they have to do the dilemma of, if there's an elderly lady and 3 children walking across the street, and the Tesla has to choose between that and a parade of people on the right, and they have to crash into one of them, how do they choose? And I've always thought about that as a curious question. What do you think?
Can I just say I don't like that scenario, because a really good self-driving car should try to not even end up in that scenario. Like we shouldn't. It's like we're a little too late at that point.
You still have to account for it, though, don't you? Someone has to make that decision. Someone has to code that.
I guess it depends on how it makes decisions, but yeah, it also depends on what it's optimized for. But yeah, it's like a high level like thought exercise, I guess. But I'm just saying, from a practical point of view, it's like we should try to not be in that situation.
Well, sure. And so there's another question that I know my friend Kevin Hughes asked before, right? And it's the classic doctor question of, if there's a train going down the track, and on the left train track is 100 people, and then on the right train track is 1, and you have the lever in your hand, which way do you pull it, or do you leave it if it's going left or right already?
Yeah. I mean, that's a hard question, and honestly, I think every med student or pre-med has been asked that question during some sort of interview process or something like that, and like there's just no right answer for this. But I think, practically speaking, what we do in the world, in some ways, in some parts of our society, we definitely pull the lever to kill the one individual, but in another aspect of our society, we don't. So, like, for example, in the current pandemic of COVID, we still divert a lot of our resources to unvaccinated individuals, which one person care for one individual's course of COVID, if they're unvaccinated, is so expensive that it can account for the care for a lot of other individuals who are vaccinated, right? So in some ways, that decision is still being made every single day about our society, about our healthcare system. And I think even our healthcare system can't make that decision. And I don't think, as doctors and as individuals, we should be able to make that decision either. Yeah, I don't know. I think it's so challenging, because as physicians, we're always taught that we shouldn't be making judgments about about the value and the worth of that individual's life, right? Whether or not you agree with their personal choices, you agree with their religion, things like that, or characteristics or beliefs of this individual, that shouldn't have anything to do with what we do to treat them in our care. And so if we go by that logic, then we can't ever determine the worth of the 100 individuals versus that one individual. And I think, to be honest, like the person, the right doctor would just probably like leave it to chance. And I think that's what our society has done. Like, we'll leave it to chance. We'll and if anything, we just won't make a decision, because there's no way that we can make a decision that's justified and fair, I think, and true to what medicine represents, I think.
I love it. It's really interesting that you brought up the COVID question. And thinking about it from that perspective, it's interesting, because it's either, utilitarian or not and such.
Totally.
And in this case, it's also the question of, do we federally mandate the vaccine for everybody? And that is very interesting, of, should someone be able to do that? And if so, is it for the better of most and all? And should we have the freedom of choice, et cetera? And of course, that's a very convoluted topic, especially in the States. I'm not quite sure about how it is in Canada, to be honest. That would be curious.
It is. I think it's convoluted anywhere, right? And in any of the developed countries, once you have the privilege of medicine and care, ideas like this will always kind of surface and come up. It's definitely not as controversial as the States, I believe. I think our vaccination rates are way higher in the States. And, we don't necessarily have the same campaigns to promote vaccination. Like, you don't get a free Metro card for getting vaccinated. It was really interesting. When I arrived at New York, I was buying a 7-day pass, and you can get it for free if you get a COVID shot. So I was like really considering like, hey, I'm willing to get a COVID shot just so I can save the $40. But like, we don't have that in Canada. And I think it says a lot about the differences in our communities, right? Like, we're not at that stage. And so I think it is controversial, and we've had a lot of protests and things like that, just like you guys have. But maybe in some ways a little bit less.
How is the healthcare system again in Canada?
Say that again, sorry?
What's the healthcare system like again in Canada? Is it more like European, or is it more American?
Yeah, I think it's more European. I don't know the European healthcare system that well, but it's like a public system. It's almost like more of a socialist system where we pay for everybody else's healthcare. You don't pay for your own the cost of your own healthcare. It just goes into this big pool of money, and the government kind of allocates that to the hospitals. So that's kind of how our system works, and so it is quite different from the States. I was at a hospital. I was visiting a hospital a few days ago, and it was really interesting. And I was getting a COVID test. That's what it was earlier today in preparation for travel. And the first thing that people ask when they go to any sort of doctor that I've noticed is this covered under my insurance? And like, that's a question that you almost never hear in the hospitals in Canada. So like, I think there's fundamental differences definitely in our systems. So,
Ben, are there private practice doctors? And if so, who goes to them?
Yeah, so there are private practices in Canada. They're a little bit more limited. So you can do private practice based on what I know, you can do private practice in areas of medicine that aren't covered. So for example, cosmetics, if there's no certain cosmetic procedures aren't covered ever, unless there's some sort of medical reason for why you need to have it. So cosmetic practices are a big part for kind of private medical care in Canada. And the other thing is kind of a newer thing where some Canadians, those who have money, will choose to try to pay out of pocket for services so that they can get them earlier than people who don't pay out of pocket. So it's kind of a newer thing. And there's a lot of kind of legal battles about whether or not this is constitutional, whether or not this is legal and things like that. But there's surgical centers in Canada that are privately owned and operated, and patients that can afford it will get surgeries earlier. There are imaging labs like MRIs, X-rays, CT scans that are done, that are paid out of pocket. And if you can afford it, you can get access to those things quicker.
Wow, that's really interesting.
Yeah. So, but, I think in general, it's frowned upon and there are some restrictions in place. I was always told that you have to choose between either you work in the private system or you work in the public system. But I've worked with physicians that do both. And so I think for the most part, it's frowned upon. It's not a huge part of our healthcare system. But I think as we continue to face more issues with like wait times and things like that, it's going to get bigger and bigger.
Is there a shortage of doctors?
Yeah, I think so. I think in general, there's a shortage of doctors in Canada, but the shortage is a bit more nuanced than that. I think the main shortage is, well, certainly there are some specialties where there's a shortage across the board, but a big part of the shortage is that Canada is big. And unlike the States, even though it's big, only certain parts of Canada are developed in some ways. We have a lot of land that isn't well populated. So, we have huge cities, but they're quite scattered and there's almost nothing in between. Like there's like a few towns and stuff, but they're not big towns. They're not always very desirable to live in. And there are big parts of our land that just have crazy weather conditions that you can't even physically live in and things like that. And so I think the challenge in Canada is not necessarily the number of doctors, but the number of doctors who are willing to live outside of a desirable location. Whereas I find in the States, at least my assumption is that there's so many big cities that you can still work in maybe a smaller city that's close enough to a big city. And in most cities that you live in, it's probably somewhat close to a big city. But in Canada, that's not always the case. So I think that's kind of where the shortage mostly is. And so, for example, for certain specialists like surgical specialists or you know, a lot of different specialists, like if in general, if you're a specialist in Canada, the job market in the cities are challenging because there's a lot of specialists that want to work in the city, but no one that wants to work out of the city.
Interesting. That makes a lot of sense. A friend I just met, we went biking recently, and I met his sister, his older sister, and she just came back from working in Alaska as the only pharmacist in a very, you know, closed off region. It was very interesting.
Yeah. So it's probably Alaska is probably a bit more similar to some of the Canadian provinces where, you know, they're kind of far away from everything, I imagine.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. But I think it's also like it's a big problem in Canadian healthcare, and I don't think there's a good solution for it. I think there's been a lot of proposals on how to fix this, but it's extremely challenging. And you know, you're also asking doctors who have worked so hard and sacrificed so much to ultimately end up in a place that they have no desire to live in. And I think that's also not very encouraging and motivating to physicians because, like, I understand the need, but you know, it's a hard pill to swallow to know that you're working so hard, oftentimes giving up a lot more than other people are, just to ultimately have a life that isn't what you wanted in the first place. And I think as a society, as we move more towards lifestyle and balancing kind of your life outside of work, it becomes increasingly harder to expect doctors to do that.
Got it. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Ben, is there anything that we haven't asked you that you wanted to share to our 30 something subscribers?
I mean, there's so much that we can talk about. Like, I have lots of opinions, as you guys can tell already. Like, you know, sometimes you guys probably want to shut me up by now, but like, there's a lot of things that we can talk about. So nothing specific. I mean, if you guys have anything that you're interested in, you think your listeners will be interested in, we can talk about that. Otherwise, you know, there's a lot of interesting things that we can talk about for sure.
I love it.
Yeah.
Well, I know something that I'm kind of curious about is and since you both seem to be interested in, you know, as you mentioned, Tesla, I didn't realize that. That's awesome. That's really cool. Is transportation. How does, as you're saying, it's really difficult for doctors to find access and, or, you know, be living close to centralized cities. And that's why it's harder for other, I'm spacing on the word, not suburb, like it wouldn't be suburbia. It would be very like,
no, it'd be like
by
rural
itself,
towns, kind of, yeah, almost borderline villages. And
so how is the transportation system in general in Canada?
in the main cities, I think for the most part, it's quite comparable to like a city like New York. And I would even say in Vancouver, in some ways, our transportation system is a little bit better, definitely much cleaner. And our service is better. Like we get cell service when we're on the SkyTrain. That's what we call it in Vancouver. It's hard, for example, I, as part of medical school in Vancouver at UBC, which is the medical school in British Columbia, we have to do a rotation in a small community. And mine was a community up north in BC of around 10,000 people. So it's actually one of the biggest communities in that area. But even then, for me to get there, I had to like take a flight to a town that was maybe 4 hours away and then find a way into that town. And the other alternative is I had to drive 26 hours from Vancouver into this town. And that's going through mountains, that's going through snow, you know, so I would say for the most part, like outside of the main cities and the suburbs, transportation is quite challenging. You have to rely on car driving. There's almost no, like we don't have reliable airports kind of throughout the country. And that definitely adds to it too, because hypothetically, if you had great transportation, you could kind of have doctors come in for a bit and they can go home and they can kind of just come here for a few days and then kind of go back and forth. And that way they can balance potentially that lifestyle as well as helping that community. But we don't have that transportation infrastructure in place.
Interesting. And so what about from a technological point of view? As how do you think I'm guessing Canada's doing quite a good job in many ways. What are your thoughts from your perspective?
Yeah, like it's definitely not as great as New York. Like a lot of the things that you guys enjoy here, we don't have. Um, and I think that's the same that you can say a lot about a lot of other countries that aren't the States, right? Like you guys are a lot faster, a lot of things, whether that's like self-driving cars. We don't have the full kind of unlocked potential yet in Canada, or things that we talked about like AI and things like that. So um, I find that we tend to fall behind maybe like 5 years or so. So when you guys get something, we probably get it 5 years later. That's
Interesting.
usually
Oh,
the trend.
is the Tesla self-driving mode in Canada not as built out or something like
Yeah.
that?
So I forget what it's called now, but we only have the mode where it stays in the lane for you. Like it like
Mm.
curves around for you and follows the road, but you can't summon it. There's no like full self-driving capacity. Or I think
Can
you
you
guys
change lanes?
no,
Oh, interesting.
can't change
Wow.
lanes. It doesn't stop for lights. It only stops for cars. That's kind of the extent of our Tesla technology in Canada.
Interesting.
And I
So
think that's
is
more
it?
from a
Wow.
regulatory perspective. I'm sure the technology is there. Just from a regulatory piece, we just take a bit longer, I think, to approve these things.
Got it. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Mhm.
Wow. Very cool. Very, very cool.
Yeah, so you're definitely falling behind a little bit. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe it's, I don't know if falling behind, but just kind of taking it bit by bit, slowly
Yeah,
but
it's kind of
surely.
nice though. Like
Yeah.
we hear about it and we're relatively quick to it, but we don't get it until kind of all the kinks have been worked out in some way, so we can learn from some of your failures and mistakes.
Yeah, definitely. It's
Early in
like,
the
do you
process.
download the beta version or do you
Yeah,
wait till V2? Yeah, yeah,
exactly,
yeah. I hear
exactly.
you. That's awesome.
Mm.
I'm random. I'm curious. What are some hobbies outside of being a very
Oh yeah,
diligently and hardworking
hobby.
resident, you know?
Yeah, so some main hobbies. So they kind of change throughout the
Or
years. So
interests. Yeah.
yeah, for sure, for sure. Um, I think definitely developed a lot more hobbies over the last few years now that I'm in a more kind of stable part of my career. But I think prior to that, there just wasn't a lot of time and I didn't give myself a lot of opportunities to have hobbies. There's always, for some reason, at least growing up, I always had this guilt associated with free time and interests and hobbies. But anyways, that aside, my partner and I would play a lot of volleyball recreationally together a few times a week. My partner loves to eat, so I often get dragged to restaurants often and have to kind of uh, enjoy the experience or kind of be good
Have
company.
to enjoy the experience.
Yeah.
This is great. It's so funny.
I just don't think my palate is as refined, which is what I always tell him. And oftentimes, like what he thinks is really, really good and the difference between really, really good to him and good to him doesn't exist for me. Like they both taste great. So I don't see the purpose of eating something that's like really, really, really good because they both taste really good. So like my palate just isn't refined to appreciate a lot of the fine dining. So we like to do that a lot. We spend a lot of time with family and friends. That's a big thing. And any Vancouver-ite, we hike a lot in the summer. We ski and snowboard in the winter. And so those are kind of big things that we do. Uh, and
Wow, awesome.
yeah.
I've been trying to learn a bit more about community and how people discover community and integrate in community and give back to community. And I'm curious about where you live right now in Vancouver and such.
Mhm.
How have you and how do you and other Vancouverites, I suppose,
Mhm.
discover and or
But
connect? Is there anything that's kind of like cool that you guys use and how does it
yeah,
work?
that's a really good question. So I live in Vancouver itself, like Vancouver City proper. I'm kind of across the bridge of downtown, and I live kind of where, I'd like pretty central Vancouver, I would say. So it's there's a lot of businesses around where I live. It's really busy throughout the day. In terms of community, though, like it really depends on who you talk to. Like some people would say cities like Vancouver, like you can't find a good sense of community. And I think it's kind of like what people always say about big cities, right? Like in big cities, you can like, you meet a lot of people, there's tons of people, but at the same time, you're super lonely, and it's so much harder to kind of have this sense of community. And like, in some ways, like I agree with that, because I grew up in an area where when you walk around town, you would say hi to people that you see on the streets. And I don't know if Americans do this, but like when we hike in Canada, and be in Vancouver specifically, like you'll say hi to people that you see when you hike, like consistently.
Yeah, in Arizona we do, but in
Yeah,
California usually not, and definitely
yeah,
not in New York.
exactly. And like I love doing that, but now that I've moved to the big city, when I do that, people like look at me weird, you know. They're like, what do you want? Like are you trying to, like, I don't know, are you a salesperson, like you're trying to convert me to religion, like I don't know, like it's just it's different. So I think now that I've moved into Vancouver, it's a lot harder, like even to say hi to my neighbors in the elevator, it's a lot harder. And so I think people have a harder time connecting in Vancouver, and especially because it rains a lot, and so you spend a lot of time indoors. And yeah, and I think like the community spirits in Vancouver is also, you know, I think some would say that it's a bit lacking. Like we don't have big festivals, we don't have like big events that kind of bring everybody together. I think the last big thing that we had was the Olympics in 2010, and that was the last time that I saw like the strong sense of community. We would like be all out and about, and every time like Canada won something, especially like hockey, you would just hug a stranger, and like everybody was so happy, and like just walk around talking about the Olympics, and like there was such a strong sense of community. But like since then, we haven't really had any big events or consistent event that has kind of created that sense of community. I think there's a big dog culture in Vancouver, so I think like there's a big like community for dog lovers and people that have dogs. So I think that's one way people are trying to reconnect with their community. If you get a dog, you kind of unlock this this like community where you know, you meet a lot of people at dog parks and things like that.
Are you thinking about getting a dog?
Yeah, so my partner is really big into dogs, like huge into dogs. I think his life goal is to have like a separate dog house, like a home for these dogs. And he would just have like 10 to 20 dogs in there, and he'll just go in and play with them as a day job, and then hire like dog walkers to deal with like the maintenance. And then he just goes and like enjoys their company. Like he loves dogs, and like this is his life goal and his life dream. So yeah, we've been thinking about it, but you know, like Vancouver is similar to kind of the bigger cities where it's hard to have a lot of space. So we live in like a one bedroom, and it's not a lot of space for a dog. And we also don't feel super comfortable getting a dog in a small amount of space, because we want the dog to have the room to kind of run around and things like that. And we're also really busy, so like I don't know who would walk the dog. My partner says he would, but honestly I think it would just end up being me, and I don't want to commit to that.
Oh, so. Drama.
So I think we've been trying to hold off on that for a bit until we're a bit more, I don't know, we're a bit more stable and free and have a bigger space.
Yeah, definitely having the space for your dog to go run rather than having to always walk them, especially in apartments, is much more difficult in big cities.
Exactly. And like my partner is really into big dogs, so he would never accept like one of these tiny dogs. He wants like a huge dog. So that's even harder.
A Samoyed? I want a Samoyed.
Yeah, I think it's Saint Bernard is the one that he really likes. And so what is it, like I don't know, like those big dogs, like super fluffy, and like they're bigger than humans sometimes. You can like ride them around.
A walking pillow.
Yeah, he loves that.
I love it.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So
Ben was definitely selling Vancouver to us when he was visiting. He was like, oh, you're into hiking? You know, Vancouver has hikes. And I mean, it does sound really nice. I have not visited yet, but seems like I really like Seattle, and so it's just Canada's Seattle. Like I feel like I would like Canada too.
Yeah. I as soon as I met John, I was like, okay, Vancouver is just a place for you, because all his hobbies, a lot of them are like outdoorsy. And he loves nature, and he's got some I don't know if you've noticed, but he's like got some of these like alternative parts to him. They're like borderline a little bit hip. you know, and like I think that's totally fits with the Vancouver.
You tell.
Culture.
I want to hear.
He went to like this surf and yoga retreats, and that's like a huge Vancouver thing too, right? So like I just feel like all your hobbies would line up perfectly with Vancouver-ites, and all the things you like doing, like bouldering, being outside, biking. There's a big biking culture, like hiking and like any sort of outdoorsy nature stuff. Like we, you know, Vancouver-ites.
We got you. Go to
yeah, any sort of like outdoor activity, like you can do it in Vancouver for the most part.
Dude,
I'm sold.
Have to visit.
Yeah, we might have to convince you to come, Hugh.
I've never.
Have you had a chance to visit Canada? Have you ever been to Canada?
When I was really young, we did like some little boat tour and ended up there because there was storms in Mexico, so we ended up in Canada. And
whereabouts? Yeah. Is it just like?
It was so long ago. Water? I genuinely don't remember.
No.
That's so ignorant. It just is like when you're so young, you don't remember exactly, but you're like, I went there, but I don't remember anything. You know.
So I think that goes to show. I think that is one of the things that I think about is whether or not you should take kids and young people on vacation, because you
kids don't deserve to go.
No, because you spend so much money on bringing a kid along, and it ruins your experience for a lot of the times, right? Because you have to like watch your kid, especially when they're young, and they don't remember anything about their trip.
They're ungrateful.
Right, like you probably spent your parents probably spent like thousands of dollars taking you to this cruise, and like you don't even remember where you went.
I look at them every day and I apologize. No. I'd love to get to Canada.
Also, as like a 7-year-old kid, like you probably just want to play your Game Boy.
Yeah,
like I mean, that's what I did when I first went to Europe. Played a lot of Pokemon.
Yeah, they just dragged you along as you continue to play on the same Game Boy that you could play on at home.
Pretty much. Yeah. Ben, we ask all our guests this, but do you have any words of wisdom or parting thoughts?
Wow.
To our
parting
two or three listeners.
Yeah, this is a lot of pressure. Parting thoughts. That's a hard one. I think, yeah, you know, I really don't know. I think one of the parting thoughts that I've learned, like related to medicine, is that, I think hospitals are a lot worse of a place to be in than people expect. And I think that was like revolutionary for me when throughout my medical training. And I think this might be interesting to people, because before medicine, I was always like, oh, like, why do people hate hospitals so much? Like, they take care of you, they feed you, they like, you know, it's like supposed to be the safest place to be if you're sick and things like that. But actually, like, studies have shown that if you have a heart attack in the hospital, you're less likely to survive than if you have a heart attack outside of the hospital. I mean, there's a lot of confounders that are responsible for that. But I think it's just the idea that like hospitals are actually not as amazing and as safe and as comfortable as people expect them to be. And oftentimes, because of the limits of manpower and things like that, like you'll see patients that get like so little attention and they hate being in the hospital, and they don't even want to get better. The only thing that they want to do is get out of the hospital. And I think that's like kind of a really cool idea to think about, like the fact that, like, you know, like, especially if you have a loved one who's sick and things like that, you know, like, I think it's important to realize people don't want to be in hospitals, and it's miserable. It's a miserable place to die. It's a miserable place to spend weeks kind of like the last few days of your life, right? Like, so, you know, it's kind of something to think about. And I encourage people to think about how they would want their loved ones to die, and realize that hospitals probably aren't a great place. So yeah, I don't know if that's usually a good parting thought.
No, I think it just, you know,
it's here first.
Yeah.
There's a lot of room for improvement in certain ways, right? I feel like, right, like fintech is the big buzzword right now with a lot of investment, but I feel like the next wave is probably going to be healthcare tech and healthcare improvements and such. So
I definitely don't have really anything to say about fintech or anything tech. So I'll just
no. I think no, it's fine. I think healthcare tech would be good.
I think it was a bit morbid because we were talking about like, dying and how people want to die, and like, our relationship with death earlier today, and that's probably why I thought of that as a parting thought. So
that's curious to keep going down the morbid train before we part ways, sadly. Is Canada right to choose? Like,
like in terms of how you want to die?
Mm-hmm.
So for the most part it is. So this is really interesting, and I think you've just unlocked this huge
next episode.
Yeah, totally. But like, it's really interesting, and it's changed dramatically in the last few years. But as of right now in Canada, we call it medical assistance in dying. And for the most part, you have complete like you have the choice of when you would like it to happen. There's certain limitations. So one of the big limitations has always been mental health. So if it's for a mental health reason, oftentimes there's a lot of barriers to it, which is something I find really interesting. And then the other condition that generally has to be met is that either your illness has to have a foreseeable death, or it has to result in a significant amount of functional decline that you can't accept. So that's a big change that recently happened, that it just has to be like an amount of, like, this illness has to bring about enough detriment to your life that you personally can't accept it. So even if to other people it's not a big deal and you're not going to die soon, if you believe that you can't live with this, then that alone is enough to potentially qualify you for medical assistance in dying. So
wow,
I think Canada is like definitely one of the one of the countries at the forefront of this, and like, we're making huge advancements on that. And there's been like a lot of bills that have recently been passed on from this perspective. And so I think it's a huge thing in Canada. And I think the reason why I think about it a lot as well is because British Columbia, the province of Canada that I'm from, is also driving a lot of these numbers, because we have a big kind of elderly population on Vancouver-ite, which is an island kind of off the coast of Vancouver. And they like have one of the highest rates of patients wanting to have this service, and being able to have the dignity of choosing when to pass away and kind of the conditions that you want to pass away in. So
wow,
super interesting stuff.
That is so interesting.
Yeah,
that's the cliffhanger for the next time we have Ben on, right?
Yeah, honestly, I feel like if Ben were open to it one day to come back on, that would be really, really awesome to talk more about.
Yeah, there's so much that like you could say about it. Like there's so much to be discussed, like the ethics of it, your personal beliefs, and like the policy part of it. Like how do you actually regulate it, and how do you like allow people to have the rights to choose, but at the same time not facilitate certain things that could be detrimental to society and things like that. So
oh my goodness, yeah, we'll just put a pin in it there. We can definitely go on. And so goodness, I'm so sad that the hour or so is already up. So we want, in respect of your time and everyone else's time, like, thank you so much for coming on, saying you're a doctor in residence, Ben.
Oh no, thanks so much for having me, guys. I'm honored to be here on your 30 something episode, or I don't know the number, but
something in mid-30s now, kind of crazy. But anyways,
it's pretty awesome.
This is yet again another episode of the Moon Tea podcast, where we talk about and focus on and try to delve into and discover what craft, community, and building meaningful careers is all about. So thank you so much again, Ben, for coming on the show, and tune in next time. See ya.
Thanks for having me. Bye, guys.
Bye.